So here's a fight I see all the time. Somebody posts a chart, PEM versus alkaline versus solid oxide, and the comments turn into a religious war about which electrolyzer is the best. And I want to reach through the screen and say, you're asking the wrong question. Because an electrolyzer is a tool, nobody argues about whether a hammer is better than a wrench. You pick the one that fits the job. And the real bet, the thing that actually decides whether your green hydrogen project makes money, isn't which machine is best. It's whether you match the machine to your power and your product. I spent over a decade commercializing first-of-a-kind energy technology. The kind of work where you learn very fast that the spec sheet and the real world are two different countries. So today, we're going to do this properly. 4 electrolyzer types, the same yardsticks, no hype. And I'm going to show you the one that's quietly winning anyway, and a myth about the cheap one that is costing people real money. Everything here is public data, and there's a free one-page verdict and a comparison workbook waiting for you at bankable.show, link below. 2 numbers to hang on to. The cost gap between the cheap electrolyzer and the flexible one is about 2 to 3 times. And the whole thing turns on a metal you have probably never thought about. Let's go. Start with why the machine even matters. When you make green hydrogen, you take water and electricity and you split it. The electrolyzer is the box that does the splitting. And that box, plus the power to run it, is basically the whole cost of the hydrogen. So the machine you choose isn't a detail. It kind of is the business. Here's the number to remember. Of every electrolyzer being built in the world right now, about 3/4 of it is one single type, not the fancy one everybody argues about online, the old, boring, cheap one. Hold that thought, because it tells you who is actually winning. There are 4 types worth knowing, and here's the trick to keeping them straight. In every single one, you're doing the same thing. You use electricity to rip water apart into hydrogen and oxygen. And to do that, you have to shuttle a charged particle from one side of the cell to the other. The entire difference between these 4 machines is which particle you move and what moving it costs you. Type 1, alkaline. You fill the cell with a caustic liquid, potassium hydroxide, and the particle that shuttles across is a hydroxide ion, basically a piece of water carrying a spare electron. It swims through the liquid and through a porous separator in the middle of the cell. Because that chemistry is gentle, you can build the whole thing out of cheap, tough nickel, no precious metals at all. That is why it's cheap. The downside is you're running a tank of hot caustic liquid with a separator down the middle, so it's bulky. And if you turn it down too low, the hydrogen and oxygen can start creeping across that separator and mixing, which is exactly what you don't want. Type 2, PEM. Rip out the liquid and replace it with a thin solid film, a plastic membrane. Now the particle you shuttle across is a bare proton, a naked hydrogen ion, and it hops straight through the film. Protons are quick and the film is thin, so PEM is compact and fast, and it makes beautifully pure hydrogen. But that membrane behaves like a strong acid, and almost nothing survives sitting in acid while oxygen is being torn off right next to it. Almost nothing except iridium. Hold that thought. Type 3, solid oxide. Now go the opposite direction. Make the middle a solid ceramic and run the whole thing screaming hot, 600 to 800 degrees. Up at that temperature, the particle that moves is an oxygen ion, and because it's so hot, steam does part of the job that electricity would otherwise have to do. That is the entire reason it's so efficient. The price is right there in the description. 800 degrees is brutal on materials. Type 4, AEM. This one is the dream mashup. You take alkaline's gentle chemistry, the hydroxide ion, and the cheap metals, but you move it through a thin solid membrane the way PEM does. If you pull it off, you get PEM's compact speed without PEM's expensive metals. The catch is building a membrane that survives that environment for years, and so far nobody quite has. So, 4 machines. Which ion, and what it cost you. That is the whole game. Now, before we get to money, there's an input that almost everyone forgets, and it's a big one. Water. It's right there in the name, you're splitting water, so of course you need water. What people miss is how much, how clean, and where. On paper, it takes about 9 liters of water to make 1 kilogram of hydrogen. In the real world, once you count purifying it and cooling the system, it's more like 20 to 30 liters per kilo because you throw a lot of water away in the cleaning. And clean is the key word. A PEM electrolyzer wants ultra-pure water, deionized, basically laboratory grade, with almost no minerals in it, and, above all, almost no chloride, because chloride corrodes the cell. Alkaline is a little more forgiving, but it still wants treated water, not whatever comes out of the tap. So you don't just need water, you need a water treatment plant bolted onto your hydrogen plant. Which is where somebody always says, fine, just build it next to the ocean, endless water. And here's the thing, the water in seawater was never the problem, it's basically free. The problem is the salt. That chloride I just mentioned would chew through your electrolyzer, so you have to desalinate the seawater first, push it through reverse osmosis, and then polish it up to ultra pure. That's another plant, more energy, more capital, and a stream of leftover brine you have to get rid of. The water molecule is cheap. Getting a clean one to the right place is not. And this one isn't theoretical for me. When I've looked at sites for this kind of project, almost every serious one sits right next to a river or a lake in hydro country. For my sites, that meant Quebec, Manitoba, British Columbia, Washington State. But the same map shows up everywhere. Hydro is king. Oregon and Idaho next door. Upstate New York and Vermont. Norway and Sweden over in Europe, Brazil. And China's southwest, Sichuan and Yunnan, where the big rivers come crashing down off the plateau. None of that is a coincidence. A big hydro grid hands you two things at once: cheap, low carbon power, and the rivers and reservoirs that come with it. Your electricity and your water pour out of the same geography. That is the real sweet spot, and it's why so many of these projects cluster in exactly those places. Now you might be thinking, what about all that empty desert with the incredible sun? Here's the twist. Some deserts are actually sitting on enormous amounts of water. There's a fossil aquifer under the Sahara that holds more water than you can picture, and another one under the Australian outback. But it's ancient water, tens of thousands of years old, that doesn't refill, so you would be mining it, and a lot of it is brackish, slightly salty, so you're right back to treating salt. A couple of the sites I looked at were going to tap groundwater like that, and even then, the salt content was a headache. And pulling that much groundwater isn't a free-for-all either. You generally need water rights and a permit, and as these aquifers get drawn down, those approvals are getting harder to get, not easier. Nothing about the water is ever quite free. So here's the quiet secret of green hydrogen. You need 3 things in the same place: cheap, firm power, a lot of land, and clean, reliable water. Hydro country gives you 2 of the 3 in a single shot, which is why the map, not the spreadsheet, quietly decides where you're even allowed to build. And hold on to that word firm, because it's about to decide which machine you buy. Start with cost, because that's where the fight really is. A Western PEM system runs you somewhere around $2,400 a kilowatt. A Chinese-made alkaline system, closer to $1,000, sometimes less. That is a 2 to 3 times gap for machines that at the end of the day make the exact same molecule. Now put that next to the manufacturing number. China builds around 60% of the world's electrolyzers, and the overwhelming majority of that is alkaline. So when I told you 3/4 of everything being built is one type, this is why. The cheapest, most proven machine made at massive scale by the country that decided to own it. So case closed, right? Cheapest wins? Not so fast, because cheapest and best fit are not the same thing, and here is where almost everyone gets the story wrong. There's a line you'll hear everywhere: alkaline is cheap, but it can't follow renewables. Solar and wind jump around all day, and the story goes that the old alkaline machine is too slow and clumsy to keep up, so you need fancy PEM for that. And honestly, that used to be true, but it's now about half wrong. Modern alkaline designs can throttle from 5% up to full power, and RAM at around 10% a second. Both alkaline and PEM can actually respond to a change in a fraction of a second. The gap everybody quotes has been quietly closing for years. Where the gap is still real is at the very bottom. A PEM stack can idle down to about 5% of its power and sit there happily. A classic alkaline machine really doesn't like going below about 20%, partly because when you starve it, hydrogen and oxygen can start creeping across to the wrong side, and that's a safety problem, not a preference. PEM has one more quiet edge too. It packs far more power into the same space, so a PEM plant has a much smaller footprint than an alkaline one of the same output. When land or room is tight, that counts. And this is the whole reason I keep saying match the machine to the power. Remember those hydro sites? Hydro is firm, it runs steady around the clock, so a hydro-powered plant can lean on the cheap alkaline machine all day and never go near its weak spot. It's when you wire your electrolyzer straight to bouncy solar and wind that alkaline's floor starts to bite. And there is plenty of great solar and wind out there, the American Southwest, the Great Plains, a lot of Canada, so this was never hydro against everything else. It's that every site, the power and the water together, quietly tells you which machine and which setup to build. You read the site, then you choose the configuration, and you can watch exactly that play out in the real world. China's showcase green hydrogen plant, the big one out in Xinjiang, was built with alkaline. And for a long stretch, it ran at only about 20% of what it was supposed to make. Not because the technology is broken, but because when the renewable power dipped, the plant had to back off to stay safe. That's the alkaline catch, live, on the largest stage there is. It's not that alkaline can't do it. It's that doing it well takes smarter controls, not just a cheaper stack. Okay, so if PEM is more flexible, why not just build PEM everywhere? Because PEM has a catch of its own, and it's hiding in the periodic table. PEM needs iridium. It's the one metal we know of that survives the brutal acid environment on the oxygen side of the cell, and iridium is absurdly rare. The entire planet produced about 8 tons of it in a year, not 8,000. 8. And almost 90% of it comes out of a single country, South Africa, as a byproduct of platinum mining. Now, the engineers have been heroic here. The amount of iridium in a PEM stack has dropped from a couple of grams per kilowatt down to about 1/3 of a gram, and is heading for 1/20th of a gram. So this is a tax on scaling PEM, not a brick wall. The best analysis says that with thinner loadings and recycling, iridium can still support well over 1,000 gigawatts of PEM by 2050. But it's a real constraint, and it's exactly why the metal light options, alkaline and the newcomers, still matter. Which brings us to the efficiency king, solid oxide. Remember I said the heat does part of the work? That's the magic. A normal electrolyzer has to pay for every bit of energy with electricity. Solid oxide runs so hot that steam does some of the lifting, so it can hit 80 to 90% efficiency. Bloom Energy's demo made 20 to 25% more hydrogen per megawatt than the cooler machines. If you have a source of cheap heat sitting next door, a nuclear plant, a steel mill, an industrial site venting steam, this thing is gorgeous. But running at 800 degrees is hard on materials. Today's solid oxide stacks last around 20,000 hours, where alkaline and PEM last 3 to 4 times longer. And they hate being switched on and off. So, solid oxide isn't a bet you make everywhere. It's a bet you make in one specific place, right next to cheap heat, and only once the durability problem is really solved. Today, it's a watch. And then there's the wildcard, AEM. On paper, it's the best of both worlds, PEM speed and purity, but with cheap, abundant metals like nickel instead of iridium. If it works, it's beautiful. The leading commercial AEM today runs at a fraction of the throughput of a PEM cell, and it's only been shown to hold up for around 1,000 hours before the membrane starts falling apart. PEM and alkaline last tens of thousands. So AEM is the highest upside, least proven seat at the table. Genuinely exciting, not ready, not yet. So, Which electrolyzer is the real bet? And you already know what I'm going to say, because I told you at the top. It's the wrong question. There is no single winner. There's a match. If you've got cheap, steady power and you care most about cost, Alkaline. It's mature, it lasts, it uses no precious metals, and China will sell it to you cheap. If you're marrying your electrolyzer to bouncy solar and wind, or you need it small and pure, PEM, and you pay for the iridium and the flexibility. If you're sitting next to a river of cheap industrial heat, keep an eye on solid oxide once it stops dying young. And if you're a bettor who likes long odds, watch AEM. Here's the one line to take with you. Cheap, flexible, durable, metal light. Every electrolyzer gives you 3 of those. None of them yet gives you all 4. Anyone selling you the perfect machine is selling you something. And that reframes the China story too. China didn't win electrolyzers by building the best one. It won by mass producing the cheapest, most proven one, Alkaline, and betting that cost and scale beat elegance. For today's market, that is a very smart bet. But the next round, the flexible one, the efficient one, the metal light one, that fight is still wide open. That's the teardown. If you want the full picture, the 4-way comparison, and a workbook where you can weigh cost against flexibility for your own project, it's free at bankable.show, link in the description. Quick reminder before I let you go. I judge the technology and the economics here. I don't tell you what stock to buy, and nothing here is investment advice. Now I want your take. Of these 4, which one do you think wins the next 10 years? The cheap workhorse, the flexible one, the efficiency king, or the wildcard? Tell me in the comments and vote in the poll. There is a lot more hydrogen to take apart, and you get a say in what comes next. If this was useful, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.